Okay, we're talking about 4 key terms today with angles. 2 of the important ones are complementary and supplementary angles. Complementary angles are 2 angles that add to 90 degrees. So it can be any combination of 2 numbers that add to 90 degrees or 2 angles that add to 90 degrees. Here's an example here. We know that that little box indicates that it's a 90-degree angle. So we know that these 2 angles have to add to 90 degrees. So if we were to set up an equation to figure this out, we can say this angle plus this angle must give me 90 degrees. So I can say x plus 25 equals 90. How would I solve that equation? That goes back to 1 steps.
You would 90 minus 25.
We would subtract 25 from both sides, and what does that give me?
X equals, oh, it's 25.
65, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, 65 degrees and 25 degrees, those 2 angles are complementary because they add to 90 degrees. Supplementary, it's 2 angles that add to 180. Looking at my picture, we know that this is a 180 degree angle or a straight angle, what we learned last time. These 2 angles will add up to 180 because it forms that straight line. So again, using the same idea that I just did, this 125 degree angle plus this angle that we don't know will give me 180. So we can set up another equation that way. So 125 plus x equals 180. Similar idea when you're solving a 1-step equation. We're going to subtract the 125 from both sides. And then what does that give me for that x value? Anybody be able to do that in your head?
Oh.
55. X is 55. So this angle is 55 degrees. This angle is 125 degrees. Because they both add up to 180, they are called supplementary. You do have to memorize these so you don't get them confused. The way I remember it, 90 comes before 180, C comes before S. Whatever way you want to remember it, you do have to remember that complementary adds the 90 and supplementary adds the 180. Okay, 2 more new terms. Vertical angles. Vertical angles are directly across from one another and they're congruent. So what you want to look for congruent angles is like an X or a cross. You're looking for that intersection. When you find that intersection, vertical angles are directly across from one another. So these 2 are vertical and congruent, and then this would be 110. So these 2 pink angles are vertical, these 2 blue angles are vertical. So when you have that intersection, you have 2 sets of vertical angles, and they are congruent, meaning they have the exact same measurement. That's what congruent means. So vertical angles are really helpful if you're solving something. If you know one angle, the other angle is exactly the same. Okay, so it's another thing that you need to remember, be able to recognize it and know that they are congruent. Adjacent angles. Adjacent means next to. If you look to the person next to you, that's the adjacent student next to you, the adjacent student. Adjacent angles are right next to each other. Specifically, they share a ray. So in this case, angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent because they share that blue ray. Angle 1 and angle 2 have that same ray. So that's what makes them adjacent. They're next to. So let's look at some examples here. So we're going to identify them as adjacent, supplementary, complementary, and or vertical. It's possible for them to be more than one. Looking at this picture, we have a 60-degree angle and an 80-degree angle. Which of these 4 terms matches with that picture?
Adjacent?
They're adjacent. They are not supplementary. They don't add to 180. They are not complementary. They don't add to 90. And they are not vertical. There's no X or cross in this picture. How about this one with this one?
Complementary.
Why?
Because both the angles add up to 90.
Good. There's our box that tells us this angle is 90 degrees. 80 plus 10 gives me 90. This one's complementary. It can't be supplementary, and it also can't be vertical. It also can be adjacent. So it fits both of these. They're adjacent because they're next to each other. They're sharing that ray. So it's adjacent, it's also complementary. What about this one? What's this one?
Vertical.
It's vertical. This is that X that I was talking about. These two angles that are kind of highlighted or written the word in there, these are vertical angles. They are not supplementary, they don't add to 180. They're not complementary, they don't add to 90. And they're not adjacent, they're not next to each other, they're opposite one another. How about the last one? What's this one?
That is supplementary and also adjacent.
Good job. Supplementary, because 87 and 93 add to 180. They're also adjacent because they're next to each other. They share a ray. This is the ray that they share. They are not complementary because they don't add to 90, and they're not vertical because they're not across from one another. Okay, so I want you to be able to identify the 4 kinds of angles. I also want you to be able to know their features. So adjacent or next to, supplementary adds the 180, complementary adds the 90, and vertical are across from one another and congruent.